China has net international assets. So if they once they feel that things have worsened so much that there is no easy answer, they'll start taking the tough decisions. So I don't see this as a crisis point, meaning that this is not something that will cause a very destabilizing impact, of just like say the Soviet Union. Or there was the fact that there is high level of debt, but it's all state owned. It's about political decisions. So I would see this more of a very sustained growth slowdown rather than a big crisis.
Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal. I'm Nitin Gokhale, and you are on our evening program, The Gist. And joining me on this broadcast is Neelkanth Mishra, a well-known economist, currently chief economist at the Axis Bank and also a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council for the last 4 years. Someone who watches not just the Indian economy, but also the global churn and the flux that the global economy is going through. So welcome to this program, Neelkanth, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with where we are currently. I was looking at reports from China. Of course, it's all well known that their economies currently seem to be in trouble. From an engine of growth, the Chinese economy seems to be itself in trouble, which means the yuan is down to a 60-year low. The housing sector seems to be in trouble. And they say now that if China sneezes, the world will catch the cold. So your first thoughts on where we are as far as the Chinese economic woes are concerned, and what does it mean for the world?
So China has been 40% of incremental world GDP over the past decade. So global growth definitely becomes a concern. We should also remember that as the Chinese economy has grown, the retail goods demand in China is now as large as 2/3 of the US goods demand. So on a per capita basis, of course, they are much smaller, but given the population is 4 times as large. So if Chinese consumption is weak, if Chinese overall GDP growth weakens, there are several segments in the world which will start seeing some stress. So this is part of the reason why Europe, in particular, Germany, seems to be seeing a slowdown. There are there's tourism in Thailand. There are beauty companies in China, in Korea, in Japan, and of course, I think hard commodities that can start coming under pressure. But at an aggregate level, given that China is a current account surplus country, meaning that it produces more than it consumes, the incremental impact on the rest of the world will be a lot lower than if, say, the same thing was happening in the US or Europe.
I see. So that's interesting, because then it doesn't mean that really unless Chinese economy really tanks to depths that we have not known, the world economy is not in such a danger. But related to this is falling consumption demand in Europe and in the US. Would that impact Chinese exports, because their economy also is driven by export? It's export-oriented economy, isn't it? And from
100%. So if you see divide the Chinese growth, and so in economics, there's demand side growth and there's supply side growth. So basically, most of Chinese growth over the last 20-30 years has been because of supply side factors. So construction of infrastructure, construction of real estate, and exports. So despite all the trade wars, the global share of exports, of goods exports that come out of China has actually only gone up. So if the Chinese export story starts to slow down around the time that, as you were saying, the real estate story is finally being controlled by the government. It was being boosted by the government, and the government, perhaps a bit too late, but has started to control that. And the fact that the local government financing vehicles, which were financing a lot of local infrastructure, are also under very deep distress, it suggests that there are very few options now. So the number of options available to policymakers to sustain Chinese growth, I mean, they dwindle even more as Western consumption starts to slow.
Great. So that means what are the options for the Chinese? You already said that there are limited options, but are they also in danger of sort of being slowed down under the rising unemployment of the youths? Some numbers that are coming out are very scary. And does that affect the overall Chinese economy? And if the local government debts don't get either serviced or don't get repaid, what happens to the overall structural health of the Chinese economy?
Yeah, so those are very deep and fundamental questions. And we need to take a step back and see that this is not the first time in the last 40, 45 years that these kinds of questions have been raised. Right. So if you recall, 1978 was when Deng Xiaoping started the reform and opening up. In 1982, they changed their principal contradiction. I mean, what the primary purpose of the government is in China. In 1985, they started opening up or decontrolled pricing. By 89, and this was one of the reasons why the Tiananmen Square protest occurred, inflation had gone up to 28% year on year. It was still then not really a very well integrated economy in the rest of the world. So they have taken tough decisions. And then 1990, they kept reforming. The private sector started to grow much bigger. In 1998, they actually had to fire a very large percent of people from state-owned enterprises, so like public sector units. And they used to call it the iron rice bowl. Once you join the job, you are there forever. But that was taken away. And 2003, they had to do massive recapitalization of Chinese government banks because they were sinking under bad loans. 2009, they had to launch, massive infrastructure stimulus because the export story, it was feared, would weaken because of the weakness in the US after the financial crisis. So this is not the first time that they are seeing these kind of risks. As we all know, it is only when you are pushed to a corner that you are forced to take tough decisions. So the questions to ask are, how easy are those decisions? So the easiest decision that some people think would be that they give a demand stimulus. See, the Chinese pension assets coverage is very low. The population is aging. And with the real estate prices, because, real estate is a very large part of their net worth. If real estate prices are starting to fall, there is also this sense that you're losing net worth, and therefore their consumption weakens even further. So the government should support consumption. But there are several issues with that, and that's the reason why they have not taken those seemingly obvious choices. The first is that, from what I hear and read, that the leadership believes that giving money for free will make people lazy. So it's almost like a in principle opposition. But even more importantly, in any economy, if you give to someone, you have to take from someone else. And who that someone else is it the local elite? This is where I think the fact that it's not just one central government, that there's also provincial governments, there are local governments, and that political balance is very tricky. So one solution that can be thought of is that the local government financing vehicles, which are heavily indebted, the simple way to explain this is that when you build the road, when you build those giant warehouses or housing complexes and all of that, and there's bridges, it creates jobs, demand for steel, cement, and all that. But if those assets are not worth it, if those assets have to be written down, then someone has to bear the loss.
Right.
And that is the biggest question. And what can be done is that you force the local government financing vehicles or local government to bear the loss. The local governments also own assets like restaurants, theme parks, sports stadiums. And this is not uniformly distributed. So there are provinces like, say Shanghai, Beijing, Guangdong. So there are areas of China which don't have these problems.
Right.
Because the infrastructure, because they're prosperous provinces, so these infrastructure was justified. But there are areas where the economy is very weak, per capita incomes are weaker, they are depopulating because people are shifting to the richer provinces. Those areas are where, the one solution can be that you get the richer provinces, people from here, to start buying the still productive asset so that the losses are. So I think, see, China has net international assets. So if they, once they feel that things have worsened so much that there is no easy answer, they'll start taking the tough decisions. So I don't see this as a crisis point, meaning that this is not something that will cause a very destabilizing impact, of just like, say, the Soviet Union. Or there was some the fact that there is high level of debt, but it's all state owned. It's about political decisions. So I would see this more of a very sustained growth slowdown rather than a big crisis.
Right. So it's not a Lehman moment as in the US in 2008. So, no, but so going forward, like you already suggested a couple of things that they could do, and I'm sure they're thinking of that. But coming to particularly to India, and of course, we know that the trade deficit is very high, it's beyond $100 billion now in India, against India rather. So, what is is there a likely effect against India or for India because of the Chinese economic slowdown? India has to get affected.
Yes. So the first, I must say that looking at bilateral trade balances is generally a bad idea. Mm-hmm. So I have seen this commentary about the $100 billion deficit versus China. Right. See, remember that if India wants to be part of some of these major global value chains, at this stage, given that we have a young labor force, we are the few countries in the world with a stable political system where the labor force is expanding, we will be the last mile, or rather the last place where the products get assembled. And in which case, we will have growing surpluses with the West, but we will also have growing deficits with the countries that are slightly upstream in the value chain. So even as China was accumulating surpluses with the US, it had big deficits with Korea, Taiwan, and ASEAN. So, right. So when you're thinking about global value chains, it makes sense to look at the aggregate trade balance because bilateral trade balances will be very skewed.
Sure. But aggregate trade balance-wise, where is India?
So on the good side, our trade deficits have started to come down at an aggregate level. So if you take a rolling 12-month number, it was 265 billion or so at the peak, with oil prices falling and some of our exports starting to go up of say electronics and stuff like that. We are kind of stabilizing at a $21 billion a month kind of trade deficit right now. On the services side, our trade surpluses are rising very rapidly. So from 2018 of about $100 billion, FY23 was close to $200 billion, $198 billion. And I think that in the next 3 years, it could keep rising. So on the services side, it's very clearly moving up as well. But having said that on the good side, even bilateral deficits don't matter that much. We have to be very wary of the fact that if goods demand globally is weak, and a very large part of that is China being really much below its pre-pandemic trend or even the last 5-year trend, then there is surplus capacity in the world. And Indian manufacturing companies' competitiveness will be tested. So we are already starting to see that in commodity products. So we are seeing chemicals prices come down, and chemicals companies are complaining that it's a lot of Chinese dumping that is starting to happen. We have now seen increases in like steel imports. So initially it will start with that, but if the demand condition in China and the rest of the world remains weak for goods, then some of our manufacturers, their competitiveness will also start getting tested.
Yeah, so that's something that they have to watch out for. The policymakers will have to watch out for, and people like you who advise the government will surely keep a track of that. And I'm sanguine about that. One final question on this: that when people say that the Chinese economy is now slowing down, and therefore China might see, or the world might see, rising Chinese nationalism. It might even, try and attack Taiwan. Some timelines have been given. Therefore, the aggression that is being shown in the geopolitical sense from the Chinese side. I know that it's not your primary area of study, but surely you do keep a watch. What do you think are the fallouts of a slowing down economy or slowdown in the overall financial condition of the Chinese state?
So that argument, in fact, the fact that with communist ideology no longer relevant because China has become very prosperous, in order to keep the country together and to create a rationale for the Chinese Communist Party to stay in power, it's important to have nationalism as a thread. But there are other scholars who have also pointed out that I think Wei Yuan in 1790, starting with so there's a whole history of Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek. I mean that a lot of the early people who joined the Chinese Communist Party were also doing so because of nationalistic reasons, right? So this is not something which is very new. Remember that their strategic intent, as they have stated, is 2049. So that's a long term. And if you try to do, take steps too early, then perhaps you disrupt that because then you will be, so that the global opposition to that can create disruptions in the Chinese economy. So, when you rightly said that this is way beyond my pay grade, but looking at it based on what I know, I think you need to get to really, if it is a cynical approach, meaning that there is, because of slowing economy, there is a lot of social unrest, and therefore you need to bring people together, and therefore you need to find another enemy outside the country, and you sort of trigger a war just to stabilize the local unrest. I don't think we are there yet. While the economy is slowing, I think there is clearly, I think consumption sentiments are weak, but there are many other elements which are doing well, like airline traffic is doing very well. A lot of indications or indicators of services consumption in China are still doing very well. So it has not reached a stage where they really need to change their plans just because some economic cycle is going.
Sure. So no, I think that's a very pragmatic and practical view that you presented, and I'm glad that you are a voice of reason, because the commentary on China can be two extremes. One which supports China completely, saying nothing's wrong there. The other can be all doom and gloom, as I've been seeing in some of the Western commentaries. But I'm glad that you put the whole thing in perspective, because this is what is needed. And I suppose we'll have to wait and watch what happens in the next 6 months or so before we come to a definite conclusion. But thanks for your time, Neelkanth. Always a pleasure to talk.
Likewise. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you. So viewers, that was Neelkanth Mishra, a well-known economist and commentator on the financial sector, as well as the world economy, and a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, giving us a very practical picture of what's happening to the Chinese economy and what it will mean to the world, or the slowing down Chinese economy. So do keep watching StratNewsGlobal. You know where to reach us. Please send your feedback and comments. They're always welcome. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel if you already haven't done that. And of course, subscribe to our social media handles which are visible on the screen. Thanks for watching.